And welcome back to Culture Crossroads. It is time for the rundown. All the news and notes you need to know in no particular order. We are going behind the headlines, behind the scenes. These are the stories that are propping up the big headlines, I can tell you that. Let's kick off with one RC that you sent me from Politico, that the assisted dying bill moves forward. Here from the article, dozens of advocates who spent years in the Capitol's hallways pushing for terminally ill New Yorkers to legally end their own lives with a physician's aid are finally seeing hope. With the Assembly having passed the Medical Aid in Dying Act last month, all eyes are on the Senate, where Democratic support for the measure has continued to grow over the last few years. Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins said, "I'm happy that the conversation is starting around death and dying. I don't think that our culture was one that really embraced that conversation." No, Senator, we didn't embrace government-sponsored medically assisted suicide. I don't know why we would do that. That is akin to murder. But at least you're happy. We're codifying yet another law that brings death to human beings into our state legislature. RC.
Andrew, it was amazing to see this because we started covering this entire assisted suicide thing in Rip from the Headlines back in January of 2023. That was the story of MAID. That's Canada's assisted suicide setup. And there was a doctor very proud of her work. Here's what's dangerous, Andrew. These people think that they're doing the right thing, and they know they're not, by the way. Let's just be clear. That's Satan. That's the devil. But what was interesting about Canada, and I think this is going to spill over both to New York and also the movement in Scotland, is that defining someone who wants to take their life and the reason why is kind of a gray area. In Canada, if you're a young person and maybe you're confused or depressed, that is enough to get you into a death pod, sometimes within a day or two. And they laud this because why should anyone be unhappy about anything? If you are, just kill yourself. Make no mistake, Andrew. Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it is amazing. The trans agenda, it is amazing. Abortion, for that matter. It's amazing because the selling point really is what you just said. Are you unhappy? Are you afraid? Then you need to either maim yourself and completely bankrupt your future, or kill yourself, or kill the being inside you, kill the person inside you. I mean, the answer is death at every turn, and it's not just here in America; it's everywhere. BBC also has that the MSPs backed Scotland's assisted dying bill after an emotional debate, and it's interesting. I wonder, why is it emotional? If we're doing something that's good, it's the same thing that happens when people talk about abortion and they say they made a difficult decision. If it's just a clump of cells, why is it difficult? Right?
Exactly.
If it's not government-assisted murder, why is it difficult? If this is what they want, if this is a good thing for them, if we should be celebrating. When I celebrate, it's not difficult to celebrate over good things, but it seems like even in their own, they know it's wrong, as you said, they have to couch it that way. They'll give euphemisms for all these names, but in the end, the result is the same. Human suffering, human death, and the affirmation that you are unhappy, you are in the wrong body, you are a mess up, you are a screw up, you're a burden to our city, you're a burden to your family. You'd be better off if you weren't born, you'd be better off dead, you'd be better off in a different body. I can't imagine a more nihilistic, depressing, demonic message that we are now codifying into law across Western civilization around the world.
Andrew, it's scary to see, and to be 2+ years out ahead of it. Let me just help people understand where this ultimately leads quickly. So here we are in a place where death is normalized. Hey, you don't feel good, go ahead and kill yourself. The other thing that's happening in parallel is the entire idea of hospitals identifying someone as brain dead. and then harvesting their organs while they're still alive. People think this is conspiracy theory, yet once again, the conspiracy theorists score another basket. They dunk the basketball because this has come out now as true. Make no mistake, if these people in New York and in Canada and in Scotland can get a little bit of gray area, they'll start expanding that gray area. And before you know it, you going into the hospital may be the last thing that you ever see, because they decide you're brain dead or you're depressed and you should kill yourself, and then they take your organs.
And let's not forget the financial incentives during COVID to make sure that your COVID admitted patients, first of all, had the fraudulent PCR test, which would then justify putting you on remdesivir to put you in kidney and renal failure, and then put you on a ventilator to make your lungs fail, and then giving you a secondary bacterial pneumonia infection, and in 21 days you're dead. You can't tell me they didn't know that was happening either. But oh my goodness! All right, I want to go from there. This is from that which is demonic, and I pray that can be found out and stopped. Although I'm sure it's going to move through with flying colors. Do the absurd, all right, and walk with me here, RC. This from Conservative Review. The DNC, Democratic National Committee, moves to void David Hogg's election to party vice chair on a technicality. Now, David Hogg has been out, fumbling the ball and throwing interceptions for the progressives for the past few weeks. It's a volunteer position, okay, I think I read, and I could be wrong because I don't have it pulled up here, but I think I read that Bernie Sanders was actually kind of upset and lamenting that poor little David Hogg wasn't going to be the vice chair of the party anymore. But what I found absurd was, yes, that David Hogg would be in that position, but he was effectively placed there, and the Democrats are using a rule about an inconsistent election in order to remove him. Isn't that a little bit, I don't know, hypocritical? I don't know. It could be me. I mean, set me straight, RC.
You want to talk about just desserts, right? You get the government in this case, right, that you deserve. So the DNC deserved David Hogg, who happens to love gay frogs, I guess, for whatever that's worth. But, this guy's a weirdo from jump, Andrew, and it doesn't surprise me that he was even weird enough for the DNC to regret their purchase and then move on to technicality because, hey, you know what? If we're going to throw you under the bus there, we may as well give you a blankie and a binky as we throw you under the bus. So we're going to get you on a technicality and move you out of the way. I also find it ironic that Bernie Sanders was upset that this was happening. But David Hogg has also talked about running for office. When the circus is in town, Andrew, the best part of the circus, no matter what anyone says, is the clown car in and of itself. Because the fact that you can get 370,000 clowns into a Volkswagen is still amazing to me. And that's what the DNC is.
And you know what? If they couldn't fit all in that Volkswagen, they wouldn't be doing their part to save the environment. So hats off to them. Less of a carbon footprint. Good on you. All right, let's move right along here. This is also at Conservative Review. Liberals rage. Blaze Media, I should say, carried on Blaze Media, but from Conservative Review. Joseph McKinnon's the author. Liberals rage after Trump welcomes white refugees to U.S. They call it a farce and a sham. Let me read you a little bit from the article. Liberal activists and media personalities have long championed America's acceptance of refugees, especially from terrorist hotbeds like Afghanistan and Syria. They characterize criticism of this acceptance, particularly that born of concerns about national security threats, as racist, xenophobic, and un-Christian. Well, now, Rick Stengel, a former official in the Obama administration, told a sullen, I'm sure crestfallen, Nicole Wallace, that the admission of a handful of South African farmers whom major political parties in Pretoria gleefully sing about butchering in packed stadiums was deeply and morally wrong-headed and repulsive. That's a quote. These are the descendants of the people who created the most diabolical system of white supremacy in human history. That is apartheid, close quote. Now, RC, it is not a secret that white farmers in South Africa, they're being murdered. There is a song that goes around called Kill the Boer. The Boer is a slang, a derogatory term for the white farmer. There are rallies, and what was mentioned in that article with the leader talking or repeating over and over, kill the boar, making a gesture with his hands like a gun, and then making, machine gun noises with his mouth and repeating the line, kill the boar, to a cheering throng of an adoring audience. It is amazing to learn that the only refugees that can really be refugees are either black or brown, and there's no such thing as white people being discriminated against, except, of course, we in our own country hate white people, and that is seen clearly in this example, is it not?
It is. I'm not going to say the words because somebody will take the way that I say it when it comes to the Boer thing, and then they'll remix me on YouTube or whatever. So I don't want that to happen because it'd be funny, and then people would say I was racist. So, Andrew, a lot to unpack here, but let me give people an example of something that actually happened to me last year. So I ended up training someone who is from South Africa who now lives in the US. And what he shared with me is that he had to sell his business in South Africa. Here's why. He's an Afrikaner, obviously. He said, in South Africa, if you are an Afrikaner, if you are a white South African, and you own a business, with the rules post-apartheid, you have to sell off 50% or more of that business to someone who is a black South African. You are forced to do it. Now, I want you to imagine that, regardless of your color. I want you to imagine what I just said happening to you and what your initial visceral response would be. It is absolute insanity, I'm sure you would agree, because you don't want to give up half of your hard-earned money or what you've built to someone who has no clue what they're doing and are just going to tank it in the ground. But this is happening every day, and it's gotten to the degree that people who were not around or active in apartheid are being forced to have their own struggle session. But it's not just a Jacob Frey Minneapolis struggle session over George Floyd. It is a life and death situation. So I find it interesting that people, the talking heads on the progressive side, say, well, you know what? They need to go back to their country. If they didn't like it, they just need to go back and leave Africa. They need to leave the continent. Really? So if people who are here in America don't like it, then they just need to go back to their country. Isn't that about right? The duplicity kills me, Andrew. It kills me.
It does, and again, we can see where the things that we're doing now in portraying white people, because even that article that I read and what Nicole Wallace talked about with her guest, that's all conditioning. It's social conditioning to get people in the West, Americans primarily, to believe that white people are evil. And that everything goes, and that white people invented everything bad ever. And the thing is, where that goes, if they continue to do that, is what's in South Africa now. It's just like what we're doing here, though. We're just replacing one hate for another hate. But this one we like better because it's against the bad guys, right? That's what they say. It's heartbreaking. All right, last story. This is Breitbart. From Breitbart. Tariff-mageddon canceled. U.S. inflation stays cooler than expected. Prices up 2.3%, which is the smallest annual increase since February 21. Now, I'm not sure if that's good or bad. In terms of, I think it might be a little spinny. Hey, the prices aren't up as much as they could be, but they're still up. They're not down, right? Inflation didn't rise as much as they thought. And of course, the tariffs, Trump backed off the tariffs on all fronts. And even though there is a 90-day pause on the 124 or whatever it was % tariff to China, that's not coming back. I mean, it's not in 90 days, you're just going to ratchet it back up. And we still have the 10% tariffs on everybody. So that's going to continue. And RC, I'll say this, to the tariff strategy, if this was to get lower tariffs around the world, then I can see that. If this is an economic strategy that, with the idea that our government's going to get more income based on tariffs alone, I think it's flawed, and we're going to have a lot of problems with that. Also, Trump is also dealing with the interest rates right now that are stubbornly high. He's asking, the Fed to lower the rates and putting that on him. And of course, you do that, you are going to spur more inflation. So we're caught in an interesting spot here. I'm not going to say that I know how this ends because I don't. I'm not going to say that Trump is completely off his rocker on some of this. Clearly, we do get gouged around the world. I don't like doing anything just for fairness sake, because I think that ends up spoiling anyway. But there is some concern that I don't know how we get out of the inflationary cycle without raising the interest rates. But if we raise the interest rates, then we get a bad economy. And what's going to be Trump's kryptonite is being tied to this terrible economy. And he can try to blame it on Biden all he wants, but he owns it now. And the tariffs and the tariff policy is going to be part of what people are considering when they're going to the ballot boxes in 2026 and 2028, especially if we stay stagnant or get worse.
So, Andrew, let me give the proper lens here, because, we get our fair amount of heat for being critical of President Trump and his administration. Let me start by saying that I believe that President Trump wants to do the right thing for the United States. So let's clear the air there. That said, partying like it's 1995 with tariffs is a dangerous card to play. So let's take the China thing, for example. Nothing actually got done there outside of a pause. Everybody thinks that, he got him to the table and now he's negotiating with him. So you negotiated a pause that didn't really get us anything. So you now wonder what happens in 90 days. What was interesting to watch, though, Andrew, and this is concerning for us, and we've been watching this closely, is that some of the moves being made by the administration are basically pumping and dumping the market. Gold was spiking out of fear because of a tariff war with China. And so it was almost like a safety valve release happened, and then the market spiked. That lasted less than 1 day. And then things started to normal out. Market's down again, gold starts to go back up. And you start to ask really hard questions, Andrew. Why is this happening? Who knows about it? And now we have to go back to what we were doing before, watching who's getting wealthy when these things happen. Because generally when these things happen, they are giant wealth transfers. And if you stack this on top of where the Trump administration has been with cryptocurrency and kind of being in that game, and now he's overseas, he's in Saudi Arabia and he's in the Middle East, there are more questions than answers, and people can say 4 or 5D chess. And okay, maybe we are completely wrong. And I certainly hope we are, because I think we all agree that we want the United States to be prosperous and successful. Like, we have a vested interest in that. What concerns us and continues to concern us is how we go about some of these things, because a pause with China in a tariff war, Andrew, is not a victory.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's the same as, when we opened the show talking about the price controls for prescription drugs, and I realize this is trying to get Medicare and Medicaid to bring down their costs. They already don't reimburse doctors. Many doctors don't take those programs because of that, because their reimbursement levels are so low. So you can't imagine that's going to get any better. But you look at these strategies, you say, well, this is, it looks to be very unilateral. We're not really working with Congress all that much. And we're getting away, we are using tactics that are not foundational necessarily to America, even though we are promoting an America First agenda. Now, we might have come so far with our economy and with all of our government meddling that we probably can't just let the free market do its thing without major collapse, because so many people are dependent on our government to live. So it's going to take some time to turn that around. But you're right. I'm not criticizing President Trump's moves because I'm, anti-Trump or have TDS or something like that. I voted for the man, for crying out loud.
Right.
But again, as we mentioned before, we're going to call it like we see it. And if we have a concern, we're going to say it. Now, yeah, there might be 4D chess going on. I'm sure on some level there always is. Or at least there are things that we don't know because we can't know and we shouldn't know. And that's fine. But when you're making these kinds of moves, and Trump is mercurial, and unpredictable, and we know that economies don't like unpredictability. We know that Americans pretty much don't like unpredictability. So when you have that, and when it's these kinds of policies that really do tangibly come back to our wallets, it's that where we say, hey, listen, are we crossing our T's and dotting our I's here and making sure that we have an end game to this, because if we are going to go through short-term pain, as they all said, we're going to have some short-term pain, but it's going to be long-term gain. Well, what is that gain? I need to know the objective. And that to me is what's not clear in a lot of these things. And when you don't hear that, then you start to fill in the blanks with other stuff. All right, last word to you, RC.
You know, what's interesting, Andrew, if you look at China and some of the other countries that were involved in BRICS, you know what hasn't happened? They haven't stopped moving in the direction that they talked about. That should tell you something about how the world looks at tariffs and looks at the United States. They're going to play nice, sure, fine, but they're not going to stop building what they're building, because when and if the bottom drops out, they want to make sure that their systems are in place so they don't lose.